There is a moment in every empire's life when it believes it has conquered time itself. Rome thought it. Constantinople thought it. The Spanish monarchs who carved up entire continents on parchment thought it. Even now, in glass towers and digital networks, nations believe they've transcended the old rules, that their systems are different, evolved, immune to the gravity that pulled down every civilization before them. But history doesn't care what you believe. History is a patient predator. It watches empires rise with all their monuments and certainties, and it waits. Because every empire that ever existed made the same fatal mistake. They confused the map for the territory. The ancient cartographers understood something we've forgotten. When they drew their maps, they weren't just recording coastlines and mountain ranges. They were drawing power itself. The edges of known worlds, the borders between civilization and chaos, between the controlled and the unconquerable. Look at a medieval map and you'll see it. Dragons in the unmapped seas, monsters at the margins, warnings scrawled in Latin where the mapmaker's knowledge ended. Here be dragons wasn't superstition, it was honesty. It was the acknowledgement that beyond the mapped world lay forces they couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't dominate. Modern empires don't draw dragons anymore. They draw certainty, economic models, military projections, 5-year plans, strategic forecasts. They've replaced mystery with mathematics, but they've made the same mistake. They think the map is complete. Every civilization begins as a response to chaos. Mesopotamia rose between 2 rivers because agriculture needed water and predictability. Egypt flourished because the Nile's floods were regular enough to build calendars around, to create surplus, to free human minds from the daily hunt for survival. The first cities weren't built on dreams. They were built on grain storage, on the ability to feed people who didn't farm, who could instead become priests, soldiers, scribes, builders. Civilization is sustained violence against entropy. It's the imposition of order on a universe that tends toward disorder. And that act of creation, that first moment when humans organize themselves into something larger than a tribe, when they build walls and write laws and establish hierarchies, that's when the clock starts ticking. Because organization creates vulnerability. The moment you build a granary, someone can burn it. The moment you establish trade routes, someone can cut them. The moment you create a currency, someone can debase it. The moment you centralize power, someone can seize it. Every system that makes a civilization strong also creates the exact architecture of its future collapse. Rome's roads that connected an empire became the highways Germanic tribes used to reach the heart of power. The printing press that spread Renaissance knowledge also spread Protestant Reformation that shattered Catholic Europe's unity. The global trade networks that made Britain wealthy also made it dependent on colonies it couldn't hold forever. The digital infrastructure that gives modern powers their reach also creates the vulnerability to cyber attacks that can paralyze them in hours. The pattern repeats because it's structural, not moral. Empires don't fall because they become evil. They fall because they become complex. In the beginning, a rising power is lean, adaptive, hungry. It has to be. It's fighting for survival against established powers with more resources. So it innovates. It finds new ways to organize armies, new financial instruments, new technologies, new ideologies that mobilize populations. The Mongols conquered the largest land empire in history, not through superior numbers, but through superior organization. A decimal military system, a merit-based command structure, psychological warfare, and communication networks using horse relays that could transmit information across continents faster than any kingdom of their time. They were lean, fast, adaptive. They had to be. They were nomads fighting sedentary civilizations with castles and armies. But victory changes everything. The Mongols conquered China, and within 2 generations, Mongol Khans were wearing silk robes and writing poetry in Chinese. The conquerors became the conquered, not through military defeat, but through cultural absorption. Because maintaining an empire requires different skills than building one. Building requires aggression, innovation, risk. Maintaining requires administration, bureaucracy, stability. The very things that make you successful at conquest make you vulnerable once you've won. The warrior culture that built the empire become the liability when you need tax collectors and judges and urban planners. So the empire adapts. It creates institutions. It develops complexity. And complexity is where the rot begins. Not immediately. Not obviously. In fact, for a long time, complexity looks like strength. The Roman legal system was extraordinarily complex, and it worked. It created predictability, property rights, contracts that could span the Mediterranean. Chinese imperial bureaucracy was complex, and it worked. It created a meritocratic system where talent could rise regardless of birth, where the state could function across vast distances and diverse populations. Ottoman administrative systems were complex, and they worked. They managed a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire that lasted 6 centuries. Complexity isn't the enemy. Complexity is necessary. You can't run an empire with tribal customs and oral traditions. But here's the trap. Complexity has a maintenance cost, and that cost always rises. Every institution you create needs to be staffed. Every bureaucrat needs to be paid. Every law you write needs to be enforced. Every territory you control needs to be defended. At first, the empire is growing faster than costs. Conquest brings plunder, tribute, new trade routes, new taxes. The math works, but eventually growth slows. You run out of easy conquests. Your borders extend to natural barriers, oceans, deserts, mountain ranges, or to other powers strong enough to resist you. Now you're maintaining complexity without the revenue growth that built it. So you have 2 choices, reform or extract. Reform means cutting complexity, simplifying systems, reducing costs. It means admitting that some territories aren't worth holding, that some institutions aren't worth maintaining, that the empire needs to contract to survive. It means powerful groups losing their positions, bureaucrats losing their jobs, territories losing their protection. It means the people who benefit from the current system accepting less, so the system can continue. This almost never happens. Not because leaders are stupid, but because reform threatens the coalition that keeps them in power. The emperor who tries to cut the Praetorian Guard gets assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. The sultan who tries to modernize too fast gets deposed by janissaries who see modernization as a threat to their privilege. The democracy that tries to reform entitlement programs loses elections. So empires choose extraction. Extraction means taking more from the same population. Higher taxes, debased currency, forced loans, confiscation of property, selling offices to the highest bidder. It works for a while. The imperial machinery keeps running. The palaces keep functioning. The armies keep marching. But extraction has a breaking point, and that breaking point isn't economic, it's psychological. People tolerate taxation when they believe the system serves them, when they believe the empire provides security, justice, opportunity, order. When that belief breaks, when people conclude the empire exists to feed itself rather than protect them, legitimacy collapses. And legitimacy is the only thing that really holds empires together. Military force can conquer territory. It cannot hold it indefinitely. Rome at its peak had perhaps 300,000 soldiers controlling 50 million people across 3 continents. The math only works if most people most of the time choose compliance. And they choose compliance because they believe, or at least accept, that the system is legitimate, that it has the right to rule, that it provides value, that it represents some form of order preferable to chaos. When that belief dies, the empire doesn't fall immediately. It hollows out. The forms remain. The emperor still sits on the throne, the Senate still meets, the legions still parade, but the substance is gone. Provincial governors stop sending taxes to Rome and start keeping them for themselves. Local strongmen start building their own armies. Trade networks fracture. Cities contract. People retreat from complexity to simplicity, from imperial citizenship to local tribal identity, from monetary economy to barter, from literacy to oral culture. This is how empires actually end. Not with apocalyptic battles and burning capitals, though those happen too, but with a slow withdrawal, a gradual simplification, a return to older, smaller, more sustainable forms of organization. The Western Roman Empire didn't fall in 476 CE. It had been decomposing for 2 centuries. By the time Romulus Augustus was deposed, he ruled almost nothing. The imperial administration had already fragmented into regional kingdoms run by Germanic warlords who maintained the fiction of Roman authority because the title still carried prestige, still conferred legitimacy, even as actual power had shifted completely. And here's what the ancient maps knew that we've forgotten. The borders between order and chaos are always moving. The known world expands and contracts. What was civilized becomes barbarous. What was barbarous becomes civilized. The Vikings who terrorized Europe became the Normans who ruled England and Sicily. The Mongols who destroyed Baghdad became the Mughals who built the Taj Mahal. The Ottoman Turks who conquered Constantinople became the cosmopolitan empire that protected religious minorities and patronized arts and sciences. Power is never permanent because the conditions that create power are never permanent. Technology changes. Climate changes. Trade routes change. Ideologies change. And empires that cannot adapt to those changes become the ruins that future archaeologists excavate. Look at our world now through this lens. The post-World War II order, the American-led system of global trade and security alliances, is 75 years old. In historical terms, that's nothing. Rome lasted 5 centuries in the West, 15 centuries in the East. The Chinese Empire lasted 2 millennia with multiple dynastic cycles. The American system is barely adolescent, and yet already the signs of complexity costs are everywhere. Military commitments that made sense in 1950 are maintained in 2026 largely through institutional inertia. Alliance structures designed to contain the Soviet Union persist decades after the Soviet Union collapsed. Global trade agreements that enriched one generation now face political backlash from those left behind. The dollar's role as reserve currency provides enormous advantages, but also creates dependencies and vulnerabilities. The technology sector that drove economic growth now concentrates power in ways that make populations uneasy, governments suspicious. China's rise isn't an aberration. It's a return to historical norm. For most of recorded history, China and India were the world's largest economies. The European colonial period and American century were the aberration, a specific technological and organizational advantage that won't last forever because technological advantages never do. They spread. They equalize. Gunpowder originated in China, was perfected in Europe, and enabled European conquest of the world. Industrialization began in Britain, spread to Germany and America, then Japan, then China. Nuclear weapons were monopolized by America for 4 years. Information technology was dominated by America for perhaps 3 decades. Now the tools are global, and this is where we stand, on a map that's being redrawn in real time, watching the borders between order and chaos shift, watching complexity costs rise in established powers, watching new powers challenge old assumptions, watching climate change redraw the habitability of the planet, watching artificial intelligence promise transformation on a scale we can't fully predict. The future isn't written, but the grammar is familiar. Empires rise when they solve the problems of their time with innovations others cannot match. They peak when those innovations have spread and advantages have narrowed. They fall when they cannot reform fast enough to reduce complexity costs. When legitimacy erodes faster than force can compensate. When the periphery stops believing the center deserves its power. The ancient cartographers who drew dragons on their maps understood something profound. They understood the limits of knowledge, the boundaries of control, the reality that beyond what we know and can map and can dominate lies mystery, danger, forces we don't control. Modern powers draw maps with no blank spaces, no dragons, no admissions of ignorance. Every coastline is satellite mapped. Every ocean depth is measured. Every demographic trend is modeled. Every strategic scenario is wargamed. And in that completeness, in that certainty, lies the same ancient trap. Because the most dangerous territory isn't the unmapped land beyond your borders. It's the assumption that your map is reality, that your models capture truth, that your power is permanent. The dragons aren't at the edges anymore. They're in the complexity you've created, in the systems you can't fully control, in the future you can't fully predict. History is patient. It watches empires rise with all their certainties, all their maps, all their assumptions of permanence. And it waits, because the only constant is that what rises will peak, what peaks will strain, and what cannot adapt will eventually simplify, one way or another. The question isn't whether the map will be redrawn. The question is who holds the pen when it is.